Okay, so good evening, everyone. This is going to be our first tutorial for our unit in governance and business law. And at the moment, we're quite privileged to just have Brett as the other participant. And I'm going to ask Brett to later on it's part of the it's one of the slides that we have. I'm going to ask Brett to say something about himself, his important role in Purina, and to talk about Purina as well. And from there, we will have a discussion about some of the key issues that we are meant to cover for weeks 1 to 3 in corporate governance. And if you recall, and I'm addressing not just Brett, but I'm trying to address this to everybody else. So at some point, we'll be going over this recording. Corporate governance is a very important topic because even for those who have just lived in Australia, and for those who have been reading up internationally, you would have known that when we had the financial crisis in 1997, the Asian financial crisis in 1997, and then the global economic or the global financial crisis in 2008, the assertion of most commentators and analysts was that it was actually a failure of corporate governance that was the root cause of the financial troubles that we went through. So, and when they say governance, therefore, and we're speaking of corporate governance here, as we said, we will not try to mix that. We will try to avoid at this point a discussion about public governance because it can be quite confusing. So our focus for now is going to be corporate governance, but feel free to ask me questions about public governance. So the reason why there was an assertion that there was a failure of corporate governance that led to the global financial crisis, that if you will recall, especially in the United States, for example, in 2008, there were findings that a lot of the financial institutions had, provided loans to people who couldn't afford, the loans in the first place. There were also instances when huge companies would try to diversify their portfolio by engaging in very risky ventures. And as a result, a lot of these companies ended up losing tons of money, and some of them, closed down. And there came a point where, because of the conflagration as a result of the global financial or the global economic crisis, as some would say, huge companies like AIG, which was the dominant international insurance company, Toyota, Ford, and a lot of the other big banks in the United States had to be bailed out through what was then known as TARP in the United States. And as a result, what actually happened was that because these organizations were too huge to fail, it was the United States government and therefore the United States citizens who ended up subsidizing the failings of these enterprises. And the idea would have been that, if a business doesn't do well, if it closes its doors, then that's the risk of being in business. But because they were too huge to fail, the government then was forced to actually step in and try to bail out these organizations by providing access to finance from the US Treasury. And so the assertion was that there was a weakness in the governance mechanisms of these organizations, in the sense that there was little oversight on the part of the board of directors. So board of directors who were meant to make sure that the chief executive officer or whoever the other key management people were meant to make sure that if they were going to undertake risk for the purpose of generating profits, it couldn't be to the extent that these risks would potentially endanger the viability and even the survival of a business itself, or two, that in the process of engaging in business, for example, there shouldn't have been any shoddy dealings and no attempt to try to play around or cook the books, because we will recall one of the firms that also failed as a result of the global financial or the global economic crisis was Arthur Andersen, which then was probably among the top 3 accounting firms worldwide. And the reason why it had to shut its doors was that there was also, again, a failure of corporate governance from the viewpoint of Arthur Andersen, because they signed off on financial statements that had actually been cooked up by these companies which eventually failed, including Enron and WorldCom. And this suggests to us the importance of corporate governance, because when either these business ventures are bailed out by a government or when these are made to fail, there is a huge effect, not just on the investors, but people down the line. It could affect the creditors, the ones who the suppliers who provide goods or raw materials to the business. It could be the ones who are providing financing, and it does affect down the line the customers. It has a repercussion on the community because some people end up losing their jobs. So governance, or particularly corporate governance, is a very important topic in businesses. And if you had had the chance to go through the lecture notes, you would have realized that much of the business literature, especially in the 1980s and before that, would mainly talk about management. There was little discussion about governance. So when you look at when I was teaching at the University of Auckland Business School all the way up to about 2013, when I was there for about 5 years, because my PhD incidentally is on management. It's not even in law. I mean, I'm a lawyer and I have a Master of Laws, but my PhD is actually in management. So when I was teaching at the University of Auckland Business School, when we taught management, for example, the discussion was really about management. And if you go by the usual definition of what management is about, it's all about talking about planning, organizing, leading, and controlling, which really had a very managerial focus. And there was very little discussion about the role of the board of directors, which by law actually is the repository of authority and power within a company. So the institution within a company that actually wielded ultimate power was hardly discussed in the literature. The discussion was always about management. And we now realize that we can't just have a business cannot succeed if it is all about management and there is little oversight on the part of the board of directors, because ultimately it is actually the board of directors that set the directions of what the business ought to be. It provides the guidelines which then get executed by management. So tonight we will have we will try to have a more thorough discussion about governance, and we will also touch upon business law, because business law is very much related to governance, especially when you talk about the theory of the separate legal personality of a company, the theory of limited liability as well. And this is part of business law. And when we talk about directors' duties, responsibilities, and powers. So tonight, after the session and in preparation for the upcoming assessments, you should be able to examine and evaluate the organizations you work with in relation to principles on corporate governance and the crisis of corporate governance. We should also be able to examine and evaluate the organizations you work with in relation to principles on private legal entities and the theory of legal personality, governance and management, and directors and officers, powers, duties, and responsibilities. So now, I was, before we start talking about the assessment and the topic on corporate governance, what I'd like us to do, and we only have Brett right now, is I'm going to ask you to say something about yourself and the company you work with. And the reason why I do this is that I want you to think about, I want you, at least in Brett because he's here, I want you, Brett, to kind of think about your company, Purina, or it could even be Coca-Cola, or one of the other companies you had worked with before, because our goal is to try to apply what we learned from this unit about corporate governance and business law to the organization you work with, so that you are using a different lens this time, or a different perspective in having an analysis of your business, so that you're looking at it from the viewpoint of corporate governance or business law. And I recall statements where, to a doctor, everything that he sees is all about medicine. When he sees somebody with a problem, he's always thinking about, what drug should I give him? If you speak to a lawyer, when a lawyer looks at a person who's sick, he'd probably be looking at the legal perspective. Is anyone liable for the sickness of this person? Should I be suing somebody? Have his rights been violated? From the viewpoint of a policeman, for example, he'd probably be looking at, did somebody commit a crime? And so on. And to a carpenter, as they would say, to a carpenter, everything looks like a nail that needs a hammer. And so the beauty, therefore, of being exposed to a unit such as corporate governance and business law, especially for those who are really in the business field, is that they are provided a new lens or a new perspective in terms of trying to examine their working environment, so that it's not all about management, but then they have an idea about the regulatory framework in which their businesses operate, and therefore have an idea about not just the business risks, about the possibility that the business may fail, the possibility that customers may not want the products that they're selling, but also about legal risks that if something goes wrong, there can be legal liability on the part of the business and even on the part of the directors. So like Brett, for example, is working with Purina. We're going to ask Brett to explain more about his role. There is that realization that, and he was telling me earlier, that the product that you're selling could end up killing somebody or hurting somebody or harming somebody potentially. And there's also the possibility that if a business does not try to observe what is expected by society, then government may step in to provide a regulatory framework. And oftentimes, when you speak about laissez-faire or when you speak about a capitalist society, there is a tension in the debate on whether or not it is helpful for the government to step in to regulate business activity, or should businesses just be permitted to try to work things out on their own. And later on, when we look at week 4, we realize the difference between soft law and hard law, when we see that on the one hand, there are laws passed by the Commonwealth Parliament, but on the other hand, there exist what are known as soft laws. And these are basically codes of corporate governance that have been developed by organizations such as the Australian Securities Exchange, which try to provide principles that should be adopted by companies. Okay, so having said that, can I invite Brett to say something about himself and the company he works with? And we're going to use that as a kind of a platform for us to then talk about corporate governance and business law. Brett, do you mind?
No, not at all. My name's Brett O'Connor. I live in Brisbane in Queensland, and I've started working for Nestle Purina. So Purina is the pet food, pet care side of Nestle being the parent company. Been here for 12 months, and my role is to manage the field force in Queensland, ensure that product goes to our customers, and we have our promotions activated, and really help coach and mentor the sales force to ensure they're getting obviously the best sales possible. The type of customers I look after are mum and dad pet stores, corporate pet stores like a Pet Barn or a Pet Stock, and also independent grocery stores, your IGA, which are, some of them are corporate stores and some of them are mum and dad owned stores as well. So that's what I'm doing currently, and it's a good job to be working for. Yeah. Very
good. Brett, of course I'm familiar with Purina because I've got 2 dogs myself. I've always owned dogs, so we use Purina all the time. Some individuals may not be aware what Purina is about. Do you mind telling us, what the business is about?
Yes. So I guess we have a bit of a mission statement, which is about basically enriching all pets and pet owners' lives. So the products that we sell are always something that has a benefit to the dogs or cat. So we don't sell products that are, just treats that have no real nutritional value or anything like that. All ours are science-based. We have 500 scientists around the world in the Nestle network that everything is proven, everything we put in our food is science backed. So it's we won't put anything in our food that we don't actually prove does something benefit for the pet. It's got the highest standards in the world. I think we have factories in Blaney in New South Wales. So everything's Australian made. We don't import any of our food. All the ingredients are from Australia. So it's really ethical company, and it covers dog and cat food.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Brett. So should I be saying something about myself? Probably not, because I don't have to.
No, we know who you are.
Okay, so thank you, Brett, for that. I was meant initially to talk about the unit assessment, so I'm just going to have to skip that. It's in the unit profile. But so what I really wanted to do was for us to use the assessment tasks for the first presentation, which is actually going to be due on the 7th of September, which is about a month and a half. And what we're going to do therefore is that we're going to use some of these assessment tasks in order to frame the discussion questions tonight. So perhaps, Brett, can I just ask you to kind of go over, read for us the assessment task concerning presentation?
Yep, no problem. So each student shall do a 15-minute oral presentation on a specific organisation that involves one of the following tasks. Assesses and evaluates the key aspects of the legal systems that operate in Australia and internationally, and their impact on the operation of the organisation within a specific legal jurisdiction. Second part is analyses critically the legal issues that confront the organisation and its managers, and explain the legal risks associated with key management decisions. Assesses corporate governance frameworks that the organisation needs to employ or has employed to successfully manage business activity to minimise legal risks, or evaluates the role of law in enabling the organisation to achieve its corporate goals through strategies that are socially responsible, sustainable, and ethical.
Okay, thank you, Brett. So as far as this assessment task is concerned, the students are actually required to just focus on one of the assessment tasks, one of those tasks. So
okay, yep.
Assessing and evaluating the key aspects of the legal system, or it could be about analyzing critically the legal issues that confront the organization. It shouldn't be about the four of them. It should be on only one of those. And it's a 15-minute oral presentation. Initially, the plan had been for students to actually do a live oral presentation during one of the intensive sessions which were meant to be done in Melbourne. Because the original plan had been that many of the students who would have been enrolling in this unit would have been from the Master of Public Accounting course, which would have essentially meant that the students would have been international students. And as it turns out, a lot of the ones who enrolled in this unit today are actually MBA students. And because they're essentially Aussies, they're studying online, and we don't really have a face-to-face session. So what will happen as far as the presentation is concerned is that you will then be asked either to do a 15-minute recorded oral presentation, which you're gonna probably submit it. You're gonna have to post it in YouTube, then you send me the link. Or two, during one of these sessions we will have towards the deadline, you will be asked during a live tutorial like we're having now, you'll be asked to do a 15-minute live oral presentation. So you have those two choices. So in the event you're unable to join a Zoom tutorial towards the deadline, you have the option of submitting by the deadline or earlier a pre-recorded 15-minute oral presentation. Okay, very good. So we're going to skip the rest of the assessment criteria because they're all available in the unit profile. So this might get tricky because a lot of these it's just going to be Brett and me. So if you don't mind, Brett, just share what you could when we have these discussion questions. If you feel uncomfortable at answering them, that's fine. But what we need to remember is that this is a learning session. So I'm not here to embarrass anyone. And for all I know, Brett, you actually know more than me because you have the experience, which I don't.
No, I don't.
I probably know a little bit of the theory, but in terms of really being out there in the corporate world, you're probably in a better position to know, how things are. So it will be very helpful to the rest of the class for you to be able to share some of these experiences, because my goal is to try to ask you to connect these concepts with what you're seeing in the workplace, either today or in the past. Okay, so let's begin with the discussion question one. And as I said, feel free to say something or not. And, I will obviously be joining in as well. So question one, what do you understand about corporate governance and the crisis of corporate governance?
Yeah, well, look, corporate governance to me is, I've got the definition here in front of me, but, it's the framework of rules and relationships and systems and processes within which an authority is exercised. But I could go through all that, but I guess for me, corporate governance is, it's not just relationship to the shareholders. I guess back in the day, that's what it was. It was about creating wealth and profit for the shareholders. But more recently with with things around sustainability and against the environment and I guess good social justice with corporations. It's all about making sure you're doing the right thing by the environment, by the society, by government, by everybody outside of by shareholders. And sometimes, I mean, that's the crisis, I guess, going into the next part is that can be at the detriment of shareholders. And that's where that uncertainty can come from the board of directors of which way they go, I guess.
That's true. That's interesting, Brett, that you brought up this, the other stakeholders, as we would say, the non-shareholder stakeholders. You talked about sustainability, you talked about the environment, you talked about customers, and you were emphasizing the fact that in the past, when we talked about corporate governance, it was always about, shareholder wealth and the shareholder profit, and that this was the duty of the directors to make sure that the shareholders were happy. But today, it would appear that a company that simply says, our job is to make shareholders happy, such a company would probably have a backlash against it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Why do you suppose is that the case? Because what we need to remember is that eventually, if you follow the law, the general understanding really is that the duty of a company and the duty of the directors lies with shareholders. That is the conventional view. So far, there is no legal duty that is recognized on the part of directors that they actually have a legal duty towards stakeholders. So conventionally, the law requires or defines the duty of a company and directors only in terms of ensuring that the interests of the company and by extension, the interests of the shareholders are promoted. And yet there is this debate, there seems to be this pressure that duty has to be extended towards non-shareholder stakeholders. Why do you suppose is this happening? And is that something that's being discussed in your company?
Yeah, look, definitely. I think people are more curious now about the products that they buy. The whole health and well-being is a big example of that. They want to know where their products are sourced, how they were made, where they were made, and they want to understand more about everything about the company of the products they buy. So if they feel that the company isn't abiding by sustainability or they're sourcing their products overseas as opposed to Australia, they're not going to support those products. So no longer. So really, the board, by protecting shareholder wealth, they need to take these concepts into consideration because that is protecting shareholders' wealth, so those consumers aren't walking away from their product.
That's really curious in a sense, because when you look at it, what the law requires is for a company and the directors to promote the interests of the company and by extension the shareholders. And yet there seems to be this discussion, as you pointed out, that even in terms of sourcing the raw materials, in your case, you're trying to source raw materials in Australia and not abroad. Why would, you wonder, why would shareholders, is it the shareholders who are applying the pressure on the directors to source the raw materials only in Australia? Or is it, where is this pressure coming from, do you suppose?
Look, I think it's consumers, which could be shareholders in some cases, but
that's right, yeah.
But consumers purchasing that product, and if consumers are saying no because it's not sourced in Australia, for example, that's just one example, then shareholders will put pressure on because they understand that that's going to be a detriment to sales, which is profit, and they'll also put pressure on the board of directors to ensure they're doing those things correctly.
Oh, that's interesting. That never occurred to me. Because oftentimes as a lawyer, I kind of more often than not, I kind of assess things only from the viewpoint of the law. And so what it tells us, what you're telling me now, is that if you just do things based on what the law requires you, or what is oftentimes known as legal responsibility only from the viewpoint of corporate social responsibility, there can be a very bad reaction on the part of the consumers.
Yeah, I think
if
nowadays
complying with the law, you may end up losing a lot of your consumers. Is that the case?
Yeah, well, definitely in the companies I've worked for, where they're fast-moving consumer goods, people are buying them every day, and they want to know where they're made from, what's in it, and yeah, it's a big part of a consumer now wanting to support Australia or support health and well-being. It's just two things that they look at, where the packaging comes from. Like they're just a lot more knowledgeable now, consumer now, than they were 10, 20 years ago.
Ah, right. In fact, what you're suggesting, that companies are forced and compelled to also consider the interests and the viewpoint of consumers, because they vote with their wallets.
Yes.
What you're actually suggesting is, and you were saying that by also having a consideration of the interests and the viewpoints of consumers is actually to the benefit of the company, because it has loyal customers who are buying stuff. And so there is an argument. So initially, the idea was that based on the shareholder promissory theory of corporate governance, the idea was the main objective of any company, or the directors in general, would be to ensure that the interests of the shareholders are promoted. So it's about the primacy of the shareholders. But another argument really is that when you say that you're trying to promote the interests of the shareholders, actually by making consumers happy and therefore increasing the profits of the business, that redounds to the benefit of the company.
Yes.
So in fact, that is what is also known, as we discussed later on, as the enlightened shareholder value theory. So if you are an enlightened shareholder, you realize that the best way for a business to become sustainable and to become really profitable is not just to have a narrow view of the business interest in terms of what directly makes a company, the shareholders happy, but also having a conscious attempt at considering the interests of stakeholders such as consumers, because if they do not end up patronizing a particular business, then the business will suffer, and then the shareholders will suffer. So that's known as the enlightened shareholder value theory.
Okay. Yep.
What was your experience, Brett, in relation to Coca-Cola? Because as you said, there seems to be a decline because you were with Coca-Cola before.
Yep.
If you're free to talk about that, because there seems to be a decline in the market share of Coca-Cola as a result of the use of sugar.
Yes.
So how does that relate to corporate governance? From what do you think? I mean, is that related to corporate governance?
Yeah, I think it's very related. So what consumers wanted to see from Coca-Cola was that especially parents with kids, and they wanted to ensure that they were producing products that weren't full of sugar. That yes, there may be a role for those products, but there need to be alternatives as well, which is Coke Zero, Coke No Sugar, Diet Coke, things like that. And what Coke did was not only produce a lot of new water products, flavored water, juice, stuff like that, but reduce the size of their full strength Coke and made them 200 mils instead of 2 litre bottles, and gave the consumer choice of taking a smaller portion to try to show that we understand that this is an issue in society, obesity, and they're doing their corporate responsibility of providing different products as well.
Again, I find it curious, because you were using the word obesity, for example. I find it curious that it enters the vocabulary of a business to kind of have a concern for obesity in society. Because, for example, a company such as Coca-Cola, if you define it narrowly as being in the business of providing beverages that people want to drink, then its goal would be to provide drinks that people want to drink, regardless of whether or not it makes them healthy or not. And for there to be kind of a social mission within a company that then has a regard for obesity, I'm not sure. I wonder where that is coming from, because
it's coming from the public.
It's coming from the public.
Yeah. So if the public don't see that Coca-Cola is at least attempting. Well, this is my view. I'm not just Coca-Cola. They're not attempting to, provide alternatives under that brand. Well, that brand may cease to be relevant to these new consumers, because the new consumers are more health conscious. A percentage of them, and they're boycotting the product, and sales of Coke, red Coke, are in massive decline. They're trying to find new products to fit that void.
That's true. What occurs to me now are actually two other things. One is that I guess if a business such as Coca-Cola or even Purina uh, fails actually to kind of consider the interest of wider society and its consumers and ends up harming them somehow, not only is there danger that consumers will end up adversely dealing with, with the business and not buying their stuff, but at the same time, there is a likelihood that the government will step in.
which
There
is
will
happening.
not,
Yep.
which is happening. Ah, okay.
Well, with the sugar tax, the government is talking about, putting a sugar
Mm,
tax, and they haven't yet,
that's
but
right.
certainly in other countries they have. In the UK, I think they have, and
That's true.
yeah,
So that's the danger that businesses confront. If they fail to proactively take steps, if they fail to initiate, responding to potential consumer complaints, it will be the government stepping in and forcing them to do certain things. And oftentimes, when a law therefore is passed, there's a likelihood that it provides less leeway on the part of the businesses to do certain things. In a regulatory framework, because of the requirements about having to provide reports, and there might be legal liability if you fail to do this or that, it does constrain the ability of a business to deal with the market. Whereas if they do it on their own, then chances are they're able then to kind of define what the proper business environment should be. So that's one. The other possibility is that, so looking again at corporate governance, as we said, there are two key concepts there. One is really the concept about there being authority and power on the part of the company, and then a sense of accountability. When you look at that, when you look at accountability, to whom is a company accountable? Is it just to the shareholders? And it would seem, yes, legally, maybe the company is accountable to shareholders, but they're also actually accountable to consumers, because they're only able to survive for as long as consumers are willing to deal with them. So if they feel like they don't have any accountability to consumers, or if a business actually says, I don't care about you as a consumer, you're not going to be in business for long. It's not going to be a sustainable business, right? And so, well, what this tells us is that when it comes to accountability and from the viewpoint of corporate governance, you cannot define or understand corporate governance narrowly from the viewpoint of what the law requires. You actually also have to look at the other stakeholders, even if not legally, even if you don't have a legal obligation, but as a matter of business practice, as a matter of wise business practice, you really need to be consumer oriented as well, unless you're running a monopoly. But even then, it may not be for long. I mean, if you have a monopoly, I don't know, like not Apple, but for a time, I think Apple could be considered to be a really dominant player. But if Apple or even Facebook, for that matter, uses its the massive market power that they have to just kind of dictate things, even after a while, either a strong competition will come in, or there will be a very strong backlash, either from the government or from consumers. Okay. Now, the other question I wanted to know was that, in relation to corporate governance, would you know if in your workplace, among fellow managers, among the people reporting to you, has the concept of corporate governance come up in discussions or not at all?
It does, I guess, in some ways. When I was at Coca-Cola, we certainly, my sales team couldn't sponsor school activities with the brand Coca-Cola, anything under with their children were under 12. So we had to make sure that we weren't seen to be supporting young children with Coca-Cola, giving them Coca-Cola at a young age. And so I'm not sure if that's quite what that is, but it's certainly sort of linked to it a little bit, where just to make sure that we're looking like good corporate citizens and be careful who we're sponsoring and things like that.
Oh, that's interesting. The what you just said now, the good corporate citizen. That's right. Yeah. Now, as a manager, Brett, why do you suppose is it important to know about corporate governance and the crisis of corporate governance?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're legally bound by it, I guess, as well, that we're going to make sure that we're not breaking any laws when we're operating our day to day. We're the face of the company as well. So as much as you got the board of directors,
that's right.
Up in their ivory towers, and we're the ones that are facing the consumer and customers. So it's important for us to understand what that means.
Okay, very good. let's move on to another topic. And this time, we're going to try to look kind of at the nature of a business or of a company from the viewpoint of it being a legal entity. And we'll talk about the theory of legal personality as well. Brett, I wanted to know, did you get the chance to, have a look at the idea of, the corporate legal entity and the theory of legal personality?
Not as probably as much detail as I would have liked, no.
Okay. Would you like me to say something about that?
Yes, I'm happy to join in, but I might let you start this one.
Okay, very good. So in the days past, if you look at the 1600s and earlier, the idea really is that it was that when a business is put up, what it actually means is that it is normally the ones who own the company who end up managing it. And so therefore, and as a result, what would typically happen is that it is actually the name of the owner, which is really deeply associated with the business, so that when a business transacts with consumers or transacts with other individuals, if something goes wrong, the other parties would run after not just the business, but the owner. And the idea really was that the business and the owner were one and the same. And so if, for example, if a business closed down and there is a creditor of a company, that creditor will run after not only the assets of the company, it will also run after the assets of the business. And when you think about that historically, and you are a businessman and you probably have money and you want to invest in business, the problem there is that if you ended up trying to put your money or run multiple businesses, let's not talk about management for now, but just look at it from the viewpoint of legal liability. Can you imagine the danger if you put up a company and if it shuts down its doors, you end up losing everything that you've saved? So let's say when you put up a business, you begin with about, let's say, $1 million. And you try to run a business, and in the course of running that business has to incur debt, right? Because you want to expand, you want to buy maybe a manufacturing plant, invest in machinery, equipment, you want to hire people and so on. And so therefore you get into debt. And imagine if by risking, by attempting to put up that business, but that business is unsuccessful. Because what we need to remember is that about 90% of all businesses worldwide will fail in the first 5 years. There are very few that survive. So even if, an entrepreneur, because I was an entrepreneur myself for over 20 years, and I was actually in the corporate sector for about that time, I've seen my own share of instances of the business closing down. And can you imagine, therefore, the danger of you trying to make your business grow, and then because the law of averages goes against you and your business closes down, and you lose everything as well because the creditors will run after your own personal assets. That is a disincentive towards going into business. So what had happened was that in the 1800s, especially in the case of Solomon versus Solomon, the courts in the UK made a legal declaration that it then recognized that a company that has been set up as a separate legal entity really had a separate legal entity in the sense that the debts and assets of that company were different from that of the shareholders. So let's say, and this is a good example. Let's talk of Donald Trump, the president of the United States, because for some of you are very familiar with what has happened to Donald Trump. In the 1980s, and that was the time, when I was in my younger years, Donald Trump was actually involved in numerous bankruptcies. He owed millions upon millions of dollars to banks. And so he went through bankruptcy, and yet, at some point he became a billionaire again. And the reason why, even if the companies of Donald Trump closed down, he was able to retain much of his personal assets. Because when a business closed down, Donald Trump only lost as much as he had invested in the form of shares. So because of the theory of a separate legal personality, what it actually means is that the company that has been set up according to law has a legal personality of its own, separate and distinct from that of shareholders. So the debts of the owners or the shareholders are not the debts of the company. They're not the same. So just because you are the majority shareholder of a company doesn't mean the company is your piggy bank. If it is a company, you don't own that. It belongs to the shareholders. It belongs to the company itself. And in the same manner, the debts and liabilities of the company belong to those of the company. They do not belong to the shareholders. So that's a crucial point. So you know, therefore, as an investor, that even if your investment, even if the company you try to invest in closes down, you know that your liability is limited only to the value of the shares that you own in the company. So that's a good thing. But at the same time, the theory of legal personality, apart from talking about the theory of limited legal liability, it is important because what it tells us is that the company, because it has a legal personality of its own, is actually in a position to enter into contracts. It doesn't have, you know, the owners don't have to enter the contracts themselves. It is the company entering into the contract. The company can own assets. It can generate debt. The company can even own another company because it is a separate legal entity. And as important, there is the idea of almost perpetual succession. So even when the owners die, the shareholders die, the company is on because the company has a separate legal personality. So that theory of legal personality is really important and has been very important in terms of trying to become the engine of growth in an economy, because you know you've got investors freely able to invest their money in businesses. So having kind of explained that, what do you suppose, Brett? You know, if you kind of try to apply what we now know about the theory of separate legal personality, what would the implication be of the theory of legal personality, particularly of a company having a separate legal personality? What would be its implication for shareholders and investors?
Well, it just means you know, you can invest. When I say risk-free, is that, you know, as you said earlier, that you're only liable for your initial investment, and if they rack up millions of dollars worth of debt, that they can't come after you for it.
That's right.
So that, you know, makes it easier for a company to raise funds from the public and you know, invest and make more money. So yeah, that's the main reason for it. As you said earlier, they can enter into legal contracts and it has its own identity that you know, it's a limited liability, I guess.
Very good. How about from the viewpoint of customers? What do you suppose is the implication of the theory of legal personality?
That's a good question. Customers.
Yeah. Or of creditors or employees.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's similar. You've got me on that one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, as a customer myself, what I would think is that when I deal with a company, therefore, unlike in the past, when you deal with a sole trader, let's say you deal with a builder building your house, okay, or somebody mowing your lawn or trying to put a fence for you, and you're dealing with a sole trader. The person you're dealing with is, you know, the business, both the business and you know the person. So on the other hand, if I talk to a person like with Purina, and I talk with an individual there, that individual I'm talking to is not the company.
Yep.
Correct? I mean, even if I talk to you, even if you're the regional sales manager, you're not Purina. You might be a good guy. You might, you know, be a brilliant manager, and I know you're honest, but I don't really know, you know, what goes on elsewhere, what the values there are. And what it suggests is that when I deal therefore with a company as a customer, it is one thing for me to be dealing with a frontliner, who's a good guy, and it's totally a different thing for me to know what's behind it, who the people are behind it. For all we know, for example, in the United States, for all we know, and I'm not necessarily against Russia, but for all we know, or I'm not necessarily against China, but for all we know, the company we're dealing with, although, you know, it appears to be ran by people who are Aussies, for example, the owners of that company may in fact be, you know, people of dubious backgrounds, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
And you then hesitate. Oftentimes, it can be difficult to disentangle, your loyalty. Are you prepared to deal with a business that is providing, for example, a good product to you, but you know that that particular company is, in a sense, not acting as a good corporate citizen because it is investing, for example, in casinos, it is investing in tobacco companies. You know what I mean? And in fact, if you look at, so for example, in Australia, much of the shares in the top 100 companies in Australia are actually owned by superannuation funds. So they're not really owned by individual investors. The individual investors do have shares in the superannuation funds. And there is the idea that as far as these superannuation funds are concerned, they ought to be investing responsibly as well. So they shouldn't be investing in casinos. They shouldn't be investing in tobacco companies. They shouldn't be investing in mining companies if these mining companies end up harming the environment. So we see, therefore, as consumers that on the one hand, we're dealing with frontliners, we're dealing with managers, but there is a different, the board of directors is one other thing. The shareholders should be a different thing altogether. So in other words, there are different legal personalities we're dealing with when we deal with a company. And if I am a creditor, the other idea I have as well is that when I lend money, and I'm not a creditor, but when you think about it, if you're a bank, if you're lending money to a company, for example, as a creditor, if that business you're lending money to closes down, you really can't run after the owners of the company. And what often happens then is that when a bank lends money to a company, it often requires the directors to sign a personal liability document that they are also going to be liable for the debts of the company itself in order to protect the bank. So that's actually quite common.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. We sell direct to our customers, and we have accounts, and a lot of our accounts directors will have to sign a personal guarantee to that account.
Is that right?
Yep.
So that's quite common.
Well, for big major multi-site accounts, not necessarily for a mum and dad pet store, but certainly if they had 10 or more stores or something like that.
But when you think about it, that kind of is an attack against the idea of the theory of legal personality, because the entire purpose of the theory of legal personality was that the directors or the owners would not have to be personally liable for what goes on in the business. And yet that is in fact what is going on today by regulation.
And a lot of them refuse to sign it.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah, so that can get tricky. That's true. Okay, very good. Okay, now Brett, my question is, we're almost hitting 7 o'clock. Are you happy to go on for another hour or?
Oh, I'm happy to go on as long as you want. I'm cool.
Okay, very good. So let's go on, because I think I'm enjoying the discussion we're having, and because I think we're moving away from just the concepts, but then trying to draw connections between what the law provides and what's actually happening out there. And I think it's a good thing, and I think your classmates are going to be happy with the fact that you actually have this experience behind you that you're able to share.
All right.
Very good. So now, discussion question 3, what do you understand about governance and management? Are they similar concepts?
Yeah, look, I think they are, but there is obviously differences. I think my understanding of governance is more around the ethics of the business, more around, I guess, the strategic direction of the business and how it will be run, and then the management is more of the day-to-day running of making that strategic. What are the principles they're going to put into place every day to make that strategic plan come to life, I guess.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, then it's around the everyday running of the business as opposed to the bigger picture stuff.
That's true. So in general, when we talk about corporate governance, part of the definition of corporate governance is that it also involves management of the company. But in truth, because corporate governance is mainly understood to be the authority within a company, then we associate the authority and power with the board of directors. But we know the board of directors does not run and manage the company. right? It has a management team. And so even with that idea that part of corporate governance is about managing the company, we do know that that management is actually delegated to a management team and delegated further down the line to senior managers. So that's one part of governance. It's about running the business. And on the other hand, it's about authority, power, and accountability. So that when a business, for example, has a legal liability, or when a business shuts down, the question is, whom do we blame? Do we blame the sales manager? Do we blame the vice president for sales? Do we blame the CEO, or do we blame the board of directors? Now, it is curious because when you look at the discourse about corporate governance, the ones who have always been blamed has always been the board of directors, because it is said that these board of directors fail to provide proper oversight over the management. So that because of the idea of corporate governance and the way that company law is structured, the legal liability is not with managers, although the managers can be liable in other ways. It could be based on civil law, it could be based on torts, it could be based on employment law. But from the viewpoint of company law, that law that regulates companies and their activities, company law imposes the legal liability directly upon the company and the board of directors, not the managers. Okay, so that's the dual aspect. One is the actual management, as Brett pointed out correctly. The day-to-day management is left to the management team, and it is the board of directors which provides the strategic direction, the long-term objectives of the company, for example. And on the other hand, we talk about authority and power, which rests ultimately with the board of directors, so that it should actually be the board of directors that determines who the key management team should be composed of. But as often happened, I wonder if you may have come across instances, Brett, where you actually have a very powerful chief executive officer who then determines who the members of the board of directors should be. And he will choose as members of the board of directors those people who he is comfortable with. And so what then happens is that the members of the board of directors, for as long as they're given the dividends and the allowances that they want, they're not even going to bother having to confront the chief executive officer, who is pretty dominant, because they don't want to lose any privileges that they have. But then that would be an example of a failure of corporate governance, because the board of directors fails to do its job, which is to actually supervise, police, and provide an oversight over the management team. And that is what happened, for example, with WorldCom and Enron, where you have Ken Lay, who was the chief executive officer of Enron, who was so dominant, and then a very brilliant guy. He was really very, very brilliant. And the board of directors were so intimidated with him, and were probably just happy with receiving the allowances. They didn't really bother questioning what was going on in the business. They didn't bother trying to understand the schemes that were entered into, by example, by Jeff Skilling, where he was moving around assets and liabilities and hiding them so that they do not appear in the financial statements. Okay. Now, question 4. What, if you can, what do you understand about directors and officers' powers, duties, and responsibilities, and how would you compare those with the powers, duties, and responsibilities of managers?
Yeah, I guess it's probably similar to what I said before. The duties of the directors is to set the strategic direction of the company.
Yes.
They will also be responsible, I guess, for hiring that executive team, whether it be a CEO or whoever it is that will carry out the day-to-day runnings of the business, the managers.
Yep.
And yeah, but at the end of the day, as you said, the responsibility lies of those directors. If those managers outside of civil stuff do, I guess, run that company and into any trouble, at the end of the day, the buck stops with the directors.
That's true. And how about in relation to the powers, duties, and responsibilities of managers? How can that be contrasted with those of the directors?
Yeah, as I said, yeah. Look, they're doing the day to day, but they still, I guess, they can still do things that the directors don't know about. Depending on how close the the directors are to the running of the day-to-day of the company. The managers, really are running the company as much as the directors on paper are.
That's true. The other thing is that when we look at the board of directors, for example, it actually works collectively. It works as a body. And so therefore, when it makes a decision, it makes a decision as a body. And a single director, for example, on his own, really has no power, because the power resides in the directors as a board. Now, on the other hand, when you look at the management team, for example, to an extent, we might say that because of functional areas, so functional areas, you can have a manager in human resources, manager in finance and accounting, manager in marketing, manager in production, manufacturing, manager in sales. They've got their own silos, they've got their own functional areas, and they're only accountable, in a sense, to meeting their operational goals, objectives, and targets. They don't, they don't have to. You know what I mean? They're not concerned, and they don't have to report to somebody from finance and so on. And therefore, we talk about lines of authority. We talk about staff function. So as far as the lines of authority are concerned, if you're a sales manager, you're reporting to that line just within sales. And oftentimes, marketing is even different.
Yep.
You don't really work, as an entire body.
Yep.
But as a board of directors, it's one body. And so managers, for example, their ultimate responsibility is just to that line within that line, and they don't really report all the way to the directors. Okay. Very good. Now, so this is a key question, a discussion question that I formulated mainly for us to kind of think about one of the assessment tasks, because this is one of the assessment tasks for the presentation. So do you mind reading that question for us, Brett?
Yep. Discuss a key aspect of the legal systems, e.g. corporate governance, directors and directors' duties, shareholders, theory of corporate legal personality that operate in Australia, and their impact on the operation of your organisation.
Okay. So if you can, Brett, just think of one of these aspects of the legal system. It could be about corporate governance. It could be about directors and directors' duties. It could be about the theory of corporate legal personality. Using one of these aspects of the legal system, how do you suppose does that impact on the operation of your organization?
Yeah, I'll probably go back to, I'll probably use this example already, but around corporate governance, it really impacts, I guess, the arena where I work now. We've really got we're a massive company that, if we do anything a little bit that's not 100% right when I say right, I guess 100% a good corporate citizen would do, it's magnified by a million times. So we have a lot of processes and checks in place to make sure that our product doesn't go to the consumer with any bits of glass or anything that's not contaminated product. So I think we have over 1 million checks throughout a year of our food product before it goes to the consumer. So our processes are above what's legally required. So corporate governance. I see. So whatever's legally required, we're 10 steps above that, because we're so big and people are looking at us that if we make one small mistake, it's magnified by a million times. So we spend a lot of money on those extra checks and measures, I guess, to ensure that we're above everybody else.
Can you just explain that part to me, Brett? Because you said that you're doing a lot of things. A lot of these checks are there, which go beyond what the law requires. And because any mistake you may have with the glass in the food, for example, for dogs, it is magnified multiple times. But in that sense, why is it magnified many times over? And why do you really have to kind of go beyond what the minimum requirements of the law are? Why is that?
Yeah, look,
maybe the other question I have is, do you suppose that your competitors and everybody else is doing it?
Look, I don't think they are. If a little company that sells dog food, that sells it to 20 stores in Australia, has a contamination in their product, no one really cares. If a company the size of Nestle, with the, I guess, with the reputation it has, any little thing that it does is magnified. People want to get on. It's somewhere that can be easily sued. We're a big company, and they think there's money there. So we've really
I see. Okay.
and we really got to be, we want to be corporate leaders. We want our consumers to think that we do go above and beyond, and that our products are superior to our competitors.
I see. Maybe the other question I have, Brett, is that, for example, let's assume that something goes wrong with the operations in Australia and some dogs are harmed, and we could really trace the harm to the dogs from a product that is sold by Purina. Let's assume that, theoretically that happens.
Yep.
Will that have repercussions as well in the global market share of Purina, or is that something that will just be limited to Australia?
Oh, look, it definitely would. It wouldn't be the same impact, I guess, if it was the other way around, of America having something that would impact on us more. We wouldn't have as much impact on like if something happened here on the, on the company in America, but it certainly would the other way around. Because we're not that big in the grand scheme of things. But certainly it would be all over the news, and nowadays with news traveling everywhere, and it doesn't matter what country it's in, everyone hears about it, would certainly impact our shares.
Right. So as far as Purina is concerned, because it is a multinational company,
yep,
you're not just talking about the national reputation in Australia or in a country. You actually have an international, a global reputation.
Yep, definitely.
That's right. Okay, very good. Do you mind ending this at 7:20, or do you want to go on? Because actually, there had been more of us.
Would have been longer.
Yeah, and I don't want to tax you too much, because would you mind if we end this at 7:20, or?
Yeah, that's fine. Yep,
that's fine. Okay, because I'm not sure if all the other students are going to be listening in to us talking for 2 hours.
Might get a bit bored of us.
Yeah, we're having the fun, and they've got to listen to us, but who knows? I mean, I'm more than sure they're picking up a few ideas here anyway. Okay, very good. We're actually down to about 3 more slides anyway. And because it's just the two of us, it's quite quicker.
Yep, okay. That's fine.
Discussion question 6. Can you read the question for us, Brett?
Discuss the legal issues that confront your organization and its managers, and explain the legal risks associated with key management decisions.
Okay. Are you able to pinpoint one of the legal issues that may confront your organization? I don't know if it's about safety, harm, whatever. Is it about marketing claims and so on? So perhaps if you could discuss one legal issue that confronts your organization and its managers, and explain the legal risks associated with key management decisions. I wonder if it also has something to do with, well, apart from sales claims, is it about the development of a sales network and so on? I don't know. Can you look a legal issue or two?
I've probably got one that would go across all businesses. It's the OH&S, I guess, around safety.
Go on.
We have a lot of reps that are on the road and driving long distances to customers and spending a lot of time on the road. So we really ensure that the amount of time, we do a lot of courses, whether it be online and driving. We put everyone on a driving course when they start.
I see.
To go through this, how to drive a car safely, how to, stop after every 2 hours and have a 15-minute break, all that sort of stuff. So,
I see.
That's OH&S, being safe, getting my staff, you want them to go home safe and alive as how they come is the number one thing in our business. So when we talk about sales or expenditure, safety is number one above all of that.
That never occurred to me. Okay, that's interesting. What would you know? Like, is Purina in some Latin American country as well? Does it have maybe Mexico or Nicaragua or Honduras? Because in these countries, for example, there is a level of, a high level of criminality going on.
So Nestle have just put a policy through worldwide policy that we cannot talk in our mobile phones, even on hands-free in our cars while we're driving. And that's over and above the legal requirements.
I see. How about in terms of, because I think it occurs in a lot of countries, you know, the idea about bribery and corruption, where organizations typically bribe their way into getting market share.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like in the Philippines, for example, where I came from, it was quite common for medical representatives to give a lot of incentives to doctors so that they would then end up prescribing the medications. They'd give, you know, hotel accommodations and flights worldwide and so on, just to get doctors to prescribe their medicines. But in a sense, that's actually corruption.
Yep.
Can you say something about that?
Well, look, I used to work for a pharmaceutical company for a short time, and
Okay.
very similar to that we couldn't, we weren't allowed to take doctors out for dinner. We couldn't buy them gifts unless it was around a conference of some sort. So you were giving them knowledge of some sort.
Okay.
It was the only way that you could do that, and that was around bribery, because, you know, people are buying doctors' golf clubs and stuff like that to get them to prescribe their drug over another. So yeah, that I had a bit of exposure to that, I guess.
So these kinds of policies that you were exposed to, was that because there was a possibility of them violating the law?
Yes.
So there is a legal framework there that kind of regulates these types of activities.
Yes.
I see. Okay. Okay. Very good. Okay. Discussion question 7, which is the second to last, penultimate question. Can you read that question for us, if it's okay, Brett?
Yep. Discuss the corporate governance framework, e.g. role, duties and responsibilities of directors, governance code and principles an organisation needs to employ to successfully manage business activity to minimise legal risks.
Mm-hmm.
Got me there.
Okay. This is part of the assessment tasks, actually. Let's analyze this. So discuss the corporate governance framework. So example, the role, duties, and responsibilities of directors, governance code and principles. So discuss the corporate governance framework that an organization needs to employ so that it's able to successfully manage business activity to minimize legal risk. So the idea really is that you use corporate governance frameworks in order both to successfully manage business activity and particularly in order to minimize legal risks. In other words, if you fail to implement, if you fail to formulate process, or not only if you fail to formulate, implement, and observe properly certain corporate governance frameworks, what would then happen is that potentially, you know, the viability of your business can be challenged. Your business might fail, or worse, you can be susceptible to legal risks. Do you have something to say about that?
Yeah, well, I guess it's the roles of the directors to ensure that the managers are, you know, I guess are putting that through the organisation, that they're following the right guidelines and, you know, getting the right codes, whatever the, could be food codes, could be whatever. But it's up to the directors to ensure that the management team is doing that. You know, they have to put in processes and frameworks in place to ensure that's happening. That's their responsibility.
That's right.
Not the manager's responsibility. It's their responsibility to carry it out, but it's the director's responsibility to ensure that they're there available.
What actually happens when employees fail to observe, you know, these policies? Are they subject to liability within the company, like disciplinary action?
Yes.
So let's say the use of mobile phones while on the road, or failure to stop after 2 hours of driving on the road. What actually happens when salesmen disregard this because they really want to be able to meet more clients and generate more money for the company?
Yep.
So they've got two goals there.
Yeah, look, it's my responsibility to make sure that the employee has read the policies and signed them off, and they understand them. So if they have an accident while talking on the phone, and if they hadn't signed the policy, then I would be liable. For when I say liable, then I would be disciplinary action, I guess. But if they signed the policy, then they could be terminated, depending on what it is, written warnings, and anything like that. Yeah.
In relation to the use of mobile phones, it's okay to use them hands-free. Is that it? Or you can't use mobile phones at all?
Yep.
Not at all?
Not at all in the car.
Oh, okay. What if one of your salesmen says he had to take an important call from a client?
No exception. So I could,
Oh, I see.
yeah, he would definitely, I could give him a written warning for that if I wanted to, yeah.
Ah, okay. Okay. So was this part of some OHS?
Yeah, it's Nestle worldwide OH&S policy that
Okay. But so it's actually beyond the law, right? The
beyond
law
the law.
doesn't require
Yep.
this. The law doesn't require this.
Yeah, I think there was an accident. What triggered it? I think there was someone got killed in an accident talking on the phone, and they decided to implement this policy.
Okay, very good. So we have a final question, and then we will be done.
Yep.
Discussion question 8, if it's okay, Brett.
Yep. Discuss the role of law in enabling the organisation to achieve its corporate goals through strategies that are socially responsible, sustainable, and ethical.
Mm-hmm.
Look, for me, it's, the role of the law is, whether it be anything against the environment, if they're just getting rid of their waste, not responsible, they're dumping it in waterways or things like that. There's laws to ensure that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And that helps the organisation ensure that they're not breaking any of those laws.
That's true.
To be successful.
That's right. So it does tell us that as far as the law is concerned, so on the one hand, we have the theory of corporate legal personality and the theory of limited legal liability on the part of directors, and that the company has a separate legal personality of its own. So on the one hand, while that is a good thing, because you have shareholders now who could freely invest as much money as they want in various companies without having to fear that they will be held personally liable. On the other hand, the law is important because as its stakeholders, the law doesn't just have regard for the interest of the company itself or the directors. The law is aware and conscious that it operates in a broader society. So it has to think about consumers, it has to think about suppliers, creditors, it has to think about the environment, it has to think about sustainability and the long term and future generations as well. So that the law comes in a way to kind of balance the interests of various stakeholders. And that can be problematic oftentimes, because who actually does the balancing act? Can a single law actually manage to balance the competing interests within society? Is it that the role of law to do that? Or is it the role of every single business? Or is it the role of society to just kind of police the way that these competing interests play against each other? So that's that's a tricky question. Okay, so I guess we end here. And Brett, you've been magnificent. You've been brilliant. Thanks for sharing your experience, your knowledge, and we certainly learned a lot because of the way you shared. We had particular examples from Purina there, and even from Coca-Cola. They've certainly enriched the session, and so thank you. And I'll see you again, I think, in about 3 weeks.
Yep.
Okay.
No worries. Thank you.
I hope to see you sometime because you live in Brisbane.
Yep. I'm sure we'll catch up.
Okay. See you soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.